Now we'll set up our spine in a way that'll give us a natural organic performance. We'll achieve that performance by using clusters, and what those clusters are going to allow us to do is as we move them, we'll see that we're getting a nice, again, organic feel out of our character and a cartoony feel as well. Now this doesn't necessarily apply to cartoons, but even for the real organic characters. So this is a technique I like to use. I think it's going to be very helpful for yourself. So let's go ahead and work on that. One way to apply clusters to all of our verts, because we're going to want to apply it to all of them, is to go to our surfaces module. Underneath our surfaces, we get to our edit curve. So making sure that our curve is selected, we'll go to edit curves, go down to selection, and go down to the last selection underneath, which is cluster curve. Notice now a cluster has been created on each vert on that spine, on the curve, that is. So now that we have these, we can label them starting from the bottom there. That's going to be cluster 1, so we can call that CL for cluster underscore what it's associated with. So that's spine A01. Can copy the name, bring it down to the next, paste it. So that's going to be spine B. Hit enter, go to the next. That's going to be spine C. And the last, we'll go ahead and paste that. Copy the name, paste, and we'll call it spine D. Okay, so we have all of them labeled. Well, what's next? What we can do, if we like, is select each cluster and see the movement we're going to generally get. So that's going to be pretty nice as we move that around. Can move around the next, underneath. Okay, so we can see the organic feel that we're going to be able to achieve from doing this. This is going to be really cool. Great. So now that this has been done, make sure we undid our moves. What we now want is for our topmost cluster to control the cluster right underneath. So we're going to want our cluster D to control our cluster C, and that will give us the right movement that we want out of our torso area, out of the chest. And then we're going to want cluster B to be controlled by cluster A, so we'll get the right movement that we're looking for out of our lower body. So this can be done via parent constraints, not direct parents, because we won't get the movement that we're looking for out of it. So let's make sure that we do parent constraints. And I do want to also mention that these clusters that we have made are set to relative, with relative checked on. You can test that out by selecting the cluster, hitting Control A, going to the attribute editor, and see how relative clusters have been created. Okay, they're created once we apply that the cluster selection. But relative clusters will allow us to get the most amount of control out of them. It will allow us to avoid any errors that may, or any wrong deformations that we would want to avoid using the clusters. So we'll make sure that they are relative. Well, getting right back into it, let's make our connections. So we'll want A to control B. So we'll select A first, followed by control clicking B, and we'll want to go back to our animation module. Here we are. We'll go to constraint and set up a parent constraint. And we'll do the same, this time going again from D to C. Okay, we'll select those in that order. Remember, driver first and then driven, parent constraint. Okay, so what we get now, if we select D, move that around. Alright, we're kind of seeing what we're going to get, a more natural looking feel out of the upper body as we're now driving that bottom cluster. And the same thing applies for as we move A. Okay, this is going to work well, especially when it comes to setting up the hips, which we're just about to do. But prior to that, we want to make sure that these clusters are going to go to the right place. And we want them also underneath our center of gravity control so that they'll deform properly. So what I like to do, rather than parenting them all directly to the center of gravity and that giving us extra groups, what we can do is just select all of our clusters, hit Control G to group them. With them grouped, can give the group a name. That's GRP underscore CL underscore SP for our spine clusters. With them now labeled, we can now control click or shift select actually our center of gravity control and hit P. And notice now our center of gravity is now controlling those clusters. We could even test out the movement, see what we get. Okay, so it's coming along. We have a few things to do still. As far as our other connections go, we want to make sure that our chest now is going to control D, which is also controlling our cluster C. So we'll get the right movement out of it. So let's go ahead and work on that. We can go to our center of gravity, frame that in our outliner, open that up, get right to our cluster group. Here it is, right at the bottom. We'll open that up so we can get to those clusters. Okay. So, again, we want to first select our driver, which is our chest, and we'll control click, remember, our cluster D, which controls C. With that selected, we simply want to do a parent constraint for that to function right. And we'll do another connection now, selecting our hip, and remember that's going to drive our cluster A, which drives B. So we'll go ahead and add that. Now what we get as we move our hips, notice we're getting some nice hip sways already. So this is really cool. We could even rotate that in the Z to check that out. Could roll it back and forth in the X. Excellent. Great. So this is looking really nice already. And then as far as the chest, as we move that around, notice, great, that's moving just the way we'd like it to. With our twist there and with our other setups, with the clusters working well for us, this is coming along very nicely. Okay, so now that all of these things are done, okay, notice how everything is still clean. We've got our clusters where they need to go. We've got our spline where it needs to go. And let's say we go ahead and just stop the lesson here, because what we're about to do is get into the setup of our squash and stretch of the spine, which will begin starting in the next lesson.